Hi there guys, Ken from Miniature Wargaming Warriors, and today we're going to be painting a Marine from the United States Marine Corps. Going to be using loads of different techniques, including basic paints, contrast paints, as well as using a sponge technique. Throughout this whole series I'm going to be trying to show you new techniques to improve your painting. So without further ado, let's crack on. So as you can see, I've primed the miniature grey. I've primed this through my airbrush. I have used mid-grey one-shot primer. You can use any sort of grey primer for this tutorial, or white if you want the miniature to pop more. So the first colour I'm going to be doing is Militarum green, and I'm going to be using my regiment brush from the army painter to do this. So I'm going to be getting the main bulk of the actual uniform itself. Not worrying too much about actually getting it over any of like the other parts of the model, because later on we're going to be going over these with a different colour. So now we've added the Militarum green, I'm going to now move on to trying to do the boots. So as you can see, just down the bottom here, there are the brown boots themselves, and for this I'm going to be using contrast paints again, Snakebite Leather from Games Workshop. And you can see I'm just trying to be a bit more delicate with this, and I'm just going to do both of the boots, avoiding the putties for the moment. So now that the boots are done, I'm going to move on to starting the flesh. So the first thing for the flesh I'm going to do with this is I'm going to be using Guilliman flesh, but to get the Guilliman flesh to pop a bit better, I'm going to be first going over the grey base coat with a Celestra grey from Games Workshop, which is a normal one of their paints, but it's quite like an off-white colour, and I recommend applying 2 thin coats of this to all the flesh areas on the model. Okay, so now the Celestra grey is now dry. You can see what I mean by it being a little bit of an off-white compared to the grey up here. It makes the Guilliman flesh stand out a lot nicer, and that's the next colour we're going to be using for all of the flesh tone is Guilliman flesh. So just apply a nice thick coat of this all over the flesh areas. So while the flesh is drying, I'm going to move on to the next colour, which is green grey. I'm going to be doing a little bit of his t-shirt in there. I'm also going to be doing the putties, all the webbing, and the ammunition pouches and the backpack in this colour. Okay, so now I've painted the green grey, including the helmet, backpack, all the webbing straps and the putties here. I'm just going to go over with Snakebite Leather over the whole rifle itself, including the metallic parts, because I'm going to paint over those later. The keen-eyed among you will probably notice I've already painted the scabbard for the knife in the leather colour as well, which I forgot to mention earlier. So you want to be quite generous with this part, and just basically get it all over the whole rifle and wait for it to dry, because then we'll be going over with any metallics. So now the rifle's dry, I'm going to be using Gore-Grunta Fur, which is a contrast paint. I'm using a different colour brown for the wood on the shovel. The reason for this is because I don't want to give the impression that it's all the same wood. So you've got different tones, different types of wood, and that's why I'm doing this. Once that's done, we'll move on to some metallics. Now that we've done all the wood on the model, I'm now going to just paint a little bit of black using black Templar, again a contrast paint from Citadel, and that is just going on the knife handle. So if you haven't done so already, what I'd recommend is you change your paint water now, because we're going to be moving on to some metallic colours. The first colour I'm going to be using is Leadbelcher from Citadel. And all I'm going to do is go over the model and paint in all the metallic areas. Okay, the final piece that we're going to be doing on this miniature is the helmet itself. You could just leave the helmet as it is, but I'm actually going to try and attempt to do the camouflage pattern. You could use the camouflage pattern all over the miniature, but you don't need to, or you could just leave it green. But the first colour I'm going to be using is Khaki from Vallejo, and that's just going to be going all over the base of the helmet. 2 thin coats for this, just to make it cover properly. Right, okay, now that that's dry, we're going to go in with our first colour, which is khaki grey. It's more of a yellow colour, and what we're going to do is we're just going to put random blotches all over the helmet. And once again, we'll do the same again with the flat brown from Vallejo. Okay, so the final thing to do with the model is to actually give it a wash. I'm going to try and avoid any areas where I put the contrast paint, so like the main bulk of the uniform. As it states with the contrast paints, they create their own recesses and shadows, so unless you want to darken that part of the miniature up, don't need to go over it with a wash. But the parts you do want to go over are obviously all the webbing straps, the helmet cover, anything that you've basically not painted in contrast. And for this, I'm going to use strong tone ink from the Army Painter. I'm going to water it down in a 50-50 mix with some water. So just going to start with the helmet cover. And also the backpack. What this does is it gets into all the recesses and makes some great shadows. Okay, so here is the finished miniature. I'm really happy with how he's turned out. Remember techniques we've used today, so we've used the contrast paints, we've also used regular paints, and we've also used the sponge technique to be able to do the helmet. Just remember little tips and things. If you do mess up with the contrast paints, it's not a big deal because you can always go over with a grey, like Celestra grey, and then repaint over them. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you want to help out the channel, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you wish to help out the channel, please visit our Facebook and Patreon pages, links in the comments below.